Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today, and I am glad to be joined this Friday by Amber Duke.
Niall, great to see you.
Welcome back from Michigan. Will you watch the election results come in from there?
Yes, I'm barely awake, but we're going to get through it together.
Well, I'm glad that you're back with us. So, let's get right to it. It has been a few days since Donald Trump roared through the nation to win his second term as president. It didn't seem to matter to the majority of Americans that he is a convicted felon and the instigator of January the 6th. Trump is now beginning to name a White House team, with news that his campaign manager, Susie Wiles, will be his chief of staff. She will be the first woman to serve in any White House in this position. Meanwhile, the outside world is digesting what this will all mean. Europe appears largely to be in mourning. France's largest daily newspaper, Le Monde, pulled no punches about its dismay over a second Trump administration. It called the election the end of the American world. In its lead editorial, the paper wrote, "The path on which Trump strengthened for his second term by his party's success in the Senate will take his country on diverges fundamentally from the one charted by the United States since the end of the Second World War. It marks the end of an American era, that of an open superpower committed to the world, eager to set itself up as a democratic model." The paper went on to say that Trump put a nail in the coffin of Ronald Reagan's model of the United States as a shining city on a hill. Meanwhile, the German newspaper Die Zeit had a one-word headline. Not one word was the F word.
Not every nation was filled with such gloom and doom. Israel's leaders called the Trump victory a, quote, historic comeback. The most fervent congratulations to President-elect Trump came from South America, where Argentina's libertarian president Javier Milei, who shares a similar brash style with Trump, called the victory formidable. And one Trump supporter, Greg Price, who helped run the Trump War Room account during the election, said this on X, "Donald Trump has been the president-elect for not even 2 days. Steve Madden is halting manufacturing in China by half in a year. Hamas calls for an end to the war in the Middle East. The Iran-backed Houthis announced a ceasefire. Putin said he's ready to work toward peace." So, where do we stand now on the global sphere, Niall? A lot going on here with a lot of different opinions.
As global correspondent, let me speak for the world on this one. Look, there is a lot of consternation and a lot of quarters about Donald Trump's election. Part of that is unsurprising. Certainly in Western Europe, the center of political gravity is further to the left than it is in the United States. Western Europe, broadly speaking, tends to favor Democratic presidents over Republican ones. I think there is an additional concern in Trump's case because he does represent a break with the traditional Republican position, which, even though it was often too hawkish for European tastes, was also involved in, very committed to NATO, for example, which he's obviously skeptical about. So look, I get the fact that a lot of Americans would understandably think, well, why don't you just keep your nose out of our elections and don't worry about it? But because the United States has such a pivotal role in the wider world, and because Trump is skeptical at best about a lot of multilateral institutions, I think that's why there is such consternation.
Oh, of course. And I'm sure they didn't like that the first time around he was pushing them to actually meet their NATO funding goals. And people close to the administration told me that they've been getting phone calls from people, or they got phone calls the first time around. I promise we're working on that 2%. We're going to get there. And this time around, they're aware that those funding commitments are probably going to have to be met again. So I'm sure they don't love that. I'm curious about this statement from Hamas, where, to be fair, they're still indicating that they want a ceasefire and that they want the U.S. to stop sending arms to Israel. But it is curious, the timing of this statement right after the election to reiterate the need to end the war. And Trump did say on the campaign trail, although he is more pro-Israel, I think, than Kamala Harris, has said that he wants Israel to, quote, wrap it up.
Right, that's right. And I think that is one of the obviously massive issues, perhaps the single most significant one, where Trump's position is not really that clear. During the campaign, obviously, there was a lot of focus on Michigan, where you're just back from, and the Arab American vote in particular. And Trump kind of spoke up to a degree for that community, said they only want peace and so forth. In the city of Dearborn, a majority Arab city, he actually won the plurality of votes. He got more votes than Harris did. Jill Stein polled at about 18%. But I think the big question that a lot of people will have is, you're quite right to say his default position is very pro-Israel. So will he just now pocket those votes and go back to a very pro-Israel position, or will he in fact try to put some level of pressure on to get to a point where the terrible situation in Gaza eases?
Yeah, and another interesting element of this is when we're talking about the transition, Susie Wiles obviously going in as chief of staff. One person who is not returning to the Trump administration is his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who was one of the chief architects of the Abraham Accords and was one of the strongest pro-Israel voices within the administration. He might still be in an external advisory role, but he's not going to be in that senior advisor whispering into Trump's ear kind of position. Could that impact his posture towards Israel?
I mean, it could theoretically. Jared Kushner was very, very emphatically pro-Israel. Now, Trump still says, of course, that he is proud of having, for example, moved the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem during his first term. He also, in addition to trying to appeal to Arab American voters, said that Jewish voters would, I think his phrasing was, need their heads examined if they voted for a Democratic candidate. In fact, the exit polls don't indicate there was any weakening of the traditional Jewish support for the Democratic Party.
Yeah, in Michigan, if I can just jump in there, I think he only gained about 2% with Jewish voters.
Right, so that did not really shift at all. The other thing, to pull it back to Europe just for a second, is that I did think it was interesting. The French President Emmanuel Macron was talking about the idea that he and the German Chancellor would want to create a more unified, more sovereign Europe, as he put it. And that seemed to be getting back to a thing that we did hear from Europe during Trump's first term, which was this theoretical idea of the European Union serving as some kind of counterweight or counterbalance to a more isolationist America. We'll have to see how that plays out in practice, but it's an interesting remark to be making at this point.
Yeah, I mean, especially considering Trump and Macron had a fairly good relationship during the first term. I mean, Melania and Bridget were very close friends, apparently, outside of their husbands, and Macron has been giving voice to some Trumpian ideas about immigration as of late. And then going to the, obviously, Ukraine-Russia war, right. Trump and Zelensky actually had a good relationship when he was in office the first time. And I wonder how much that soured because of Trump and some of his allies being very skeptical of continuing to send billions of dollars to Ukraine in aid. But he signaled, and Putin both, Zelensky and Putin both are signaling that they might be ready to negotiate if Trump is the one at the helm of the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the suggestion pretty clearly is that Trump would oppose the level of aid that has been going to Ukraine from the United States, which would very much weaken the Ukrainian position. Now, he and J.D. Vance, for example, has explicitly argued that the Ukrainians should give up some territory for the sake of peace. I think that will obviously be alarming to the Ukrainians. We'll see how much they push back forward on that.
Yeah, we sure will. All right, we have a lot more to cover today on Rising. We're going to take a quick break. Be right back after this.